the city never slept. Neon lights flickered over damp asphalt, and the roar of motorcycles echoed through the narrow alleyways. Among the chaos, Razor Carter ruled the streets. A veteran biker with a reputation for his short temper and iron fists, he believed the world belonged to the ruthless. Tonight, he was restless. After a rowdy night at the Rusted Chain, a seedy biker bar downtown, Razor staggered into a deserted alley, boots crunching against the litter-strewn pavement. The rumble of his Harley was the only sound, until a low, pitiful whimper broke through the silence. A dog. It sat near a dumpster, ribs visible through its thin fur. Its golden eyes locked onto Razor's. Unblinking. The animal was small, mangy, and looked half dead. Razor smirked. "Damn mutt, get lost." But the dog didn't move. It just watched him, calm and unwavering. Something about its gaze irritated him. Maybe it was the way it didn't flinch, didn't cower. Like it knew something he didn't. Annoyed, Razor lifted his boot and kicked the dog. Hard. The yelp that followed was sharp, but brief. The dog tumbled sideways, hitting the cold concrete with a dull thud. It didn't whine, didn't scramble away. It simply lifted its head and looked at him again, those golden eyes burning into his soul. Razor scoffed, shaking off the strange unease creeping up his spine. Stupid animal. He turned, ready to mount his bike and leave. That's when he noticed something. Further down the alley, hidden in the shadows, someone was watching him. A figure, tall and motionless. Razor couldn't make out the face, but he felt the weight of their stare. Then, in a voice as cold as steel, the stranger spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." Razor stiffened. The voice had come from the shadows, calm yet menacing, like the low growl of a predator ready to strike. He squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the stranger's face, but the dim alley lighting revealed only the silhouette of a tall figure, standing completely still. Razor wasn't the kind of man to back down. "Oh yeah?" he sneered, taking a step closer. "And who the hell are you?" The figure didn't move. Instead, a low whistle cut through the night air. Razor glanced down. The dog, the same dog he had just kicked, was now standing. Not limping, not cowering. Just standing, staring. That eerie feeling crept up his spine again. Something was wrong. The stranger spoke again, voice even colder this time. "You made a mistake, Carter." Razor's blood ran cold. His name. This person knew his name. His fingers twitched toward the switchblade in his jacket, but something in the way the figure stood, completely still, completely sure, sent a rare warning through his gut. This wasn't someone to mess with. Trying to mask his unease, he scoffed. "You got a problem with how I treat mutts? Maybe you should have kept a leash on your damn pet." A pause. Then, the stranger chuckled, a deep, unsettling sound that sent a chill through Razor's veins. "Oh, Razor. You really don't know who you just kicked, do you?" Razor swallowed. The dog sat beside the stranger now, its golden eyes still locked onto him. For the first time in years, Razor felt something close to fear. Razor's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression hard. Fear wasn't in his nature, not in the streets, not in the ring, and definitely not in some dark alley against a guy who thought a mutt was worth defending. He smirked, forcing out a chuckle. "You're acting like that's some kind of royal dog. What, is it famous or something?" The stranger didn't laugh. Instead, he crouched beside the dog, running a slow hand over its battered fur. The way he moved was deliberate, controlled. Dangerous. "His name is Ghost," the man finally said. Something about the name sent an itch of recognition through Razor's brain. He had heard it before, but where? Ghost. Not just a dog. A message. A warning. Razor's smirk faded. "That's supposed to mean something to me." The stranger stood. For the first time, he stepped into the dim alley light. Razor's stomach clenched. The man's face was sharp. Angular, with dark eyes that held the weight of too many secrets. A thin scar ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw, barely visible under the glow of the street lamp. But it was the tattoo on his neck that made Razor's breath catch. A black wolf, inked in brutal strokes. Razor had seen that symbol before. Everyone in the city had. It belonged to Luca Viper Moretti, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones. A ghost himself, the kind that haunted men long after they crossed him. The leader of the Black Vipers. A man Razor had spent years avoiding. Razor took an involuntary step back. He had just kicked Viper's dog. Ghost stared at him, unblinking. And Luca smiled. Now that you know. What are you going to do, Razor? Razor's heart pounded like a war drum, but he kept his face blank. Fear was weakness, and weakness got you killed. Luca Viper Moretti. The name alone carried weight. A man who ran the streets from the shadows, making kings or burying them. Razor had heard stories, men who crossed him didn't get second chances. They just disappeared. And now, he had kicked his dog. Ghost still sat beside Luca, watching, waiting. Razor clenched his fists. Look, man, he said, forcing his voice steady, it's just a dog. I didn't know it was yours. Luca tilted his head slightly, as if considering those words. Then he chuckled. It wasn't a friendly sound. You think this is about the dog? Luca asked, stepping closer. The air shifted. Razor had been in fights before. He knew when a man was about to swing. But Luca didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to suffocate. Razor hesitated. His instinct screamed at him to walk away, to turn and never look back. But he wasn't an idiot. You didn't just walk away from Luca Moretti. I'll pay for a new one, Razor muttered. Luca's smile widened. You still don't get it. Then, without warning, he moved. In a blink, Razor felt his ribs explode in pain. He didn't even see the punch, just felt the crack of knuckles against bone as he stumbled back. Gasping. Luca grabbed him by the collar, yanking him close. His voice was low, deadly. You owe me now, Carter. Razor gritted his teeth, breathing hard. For a damn dog? Luca leaned in, whispering, for your life. And just like that, he let go. Razor staggered, coughing. Luca turned and walked away, Ghost trotting silently at his side. But before disappearing into the darkness, Luca called over his shoulder, be ready. I'll collect when I see fit. Razor stood there, stomach twisting. Because if there was one thing he knew about Luca Moretti. When he came to collect, it was never just money. Razor stood frozen, his ribs aching, his mind racing. Luca Moretti had just marked him. And once a man like that had his hooks in you, there was no walking away. The alley was empty now, Luca and his damn dog had disappeared into the night. But the weight of his words hung thick in the air. Be ready. I'll collect when I see fit, Razor cursed under his breath and forced himself to straighten. He needed to think. Fast. Walking out of that alley in one piece didn't mean he was safe. It just meant Luca was playing with him. And Razor had been around enough dangerous men to know, when a predator takes its time, it's because it enjoys the hunt. His first instinct? Run. Disappear. New city, new name, fresh start. But then reality hit. Luca wasn't some two-bit gangster, he was a king of the underground. His reach went beyond the city. There was no hiding from him. Which meant Razor had only one option. Figure out what Luca wanted. And stay one step ahead. He made his way out of the alley, wincing with every step. His bike was still parked where he left it, but for the first time, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a ticking clock. Because Razor knew one thing for sure. Luca would come. And when he did, it wouldn't be for money. It would be for something far worse. Razor gripped the handlebars of his bike, his fingers twitching with adrenaline. The city lights blurred as he sped through the streets, but his mind was sharper than ever. Luca Moretti had given him a warning, and men like him didn't give second ones. He needed a plan. Fast. First stop, Dante's garage. Dante was an old friend, the kind who dealt in whispered rumors and dirty favors. If anyone had information on what Luca might want, it was him. Razor pulled up, his tires screeching against the pavement. The garage was mostly empty, except for Dante, hunched over an engine, wiping grease from his hands. He looked up. Froze. "Damn," Dante muttered. "You look like you just saw the devil." Razor didn't waste time. "Might as well have." Dante's smirk faded. "Who?" Razor exhaled. "Luca Moretti." Silence. Then Dante cursed, low and sharp. "Tell me you didn't cross him." Razor clenched his jaw. "Didn't mean to." Dante ran a hand through his hair. "No one means to, Razor. They just end up dead." Razor's stomach twisted. "He said I owe him." Dante looked at him carefully. "Did he say what he wants?" "No." Dante let out a slow breath. "Then you're screwed." Razor's fists clenched. "I need to know what's coming. What kind of debt does a guy like Luca collect?" Dante hesitated. Then he said two words that sent a chill down Razor's spine. "Blood, Razor. He collects in blood." Razor's stomach turned to ice. Blood. He had seen debts collected in money, in favors, in broken bones. But blood? That was a whole different game. Dante leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Listen, man, Luca doesn't do small favors. If he says you owe him, it means he's already decided what he wants." Razor's jaw tightened. "Then I need to know what that is, before he comes knocking." Dante exhaled sharply. "There's only one way to find out." Razor knew what he meant. He had to go to Luca. Every instinct screamed bad idea, but what choice did he have? Running was useless. Waiting was worse. He turned to leave, but Dante grabbed his arm. "One more thing." Razor met his gaze. "If Luca's calling in a debt, he won't just want blood," Dante said. "He'll want your blood, or someone else's in your place." Razor felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. A trade. And suddenly, the fear he had been pushing down came roaring back. Because in Luca's world, a debt like this could mean only one thing. A life for a life. Razor's hands gripped the throttle as his bike roared through the city. The night air was thick, pressing down on him like the weight of an unseen hand. A life for a life. Dante's words echoed in his head. If Luca was calling in blood, there were only two options: give him a body or become one. But whose? Razor wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a killer either. Yet Luca didn't care about morality. He cared about balance. A stray dog. A single kick. How had it come to this? His tires screeched as he pulled up to the Black Orchid, a high-end club that doubled as one of Luca's strongholds. Bouncers in black suits eyed him as he stepped off his bike. He could feel their stares, feel the weight of unseen eyes inside. They knew he was coming. One of them spoke into a mic, then nodded toward the door. "Go in." "Alone." Razor exhaled and stepped inside. The club pulsed with low music and the scent of expensive cigars. A single figure sat in a velvet booth at the back, waiting. Luca Moretti. And sitting at his feet, staring up at Razor with unblinking eyes, was the dog. Razor's blood ran cold. Luca took a slow sip of whiskey, then gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Let's talk about how you're going to pay me back." The dog didn't move. It just watched. Razor lowered himself into the chair, every muscle in his body tight. Luca Moretti swirled his whiskey, watching him with an expression that was both amused and unreadable. The dog, that damn dog, sat motionless by Luca's feet, its golden eyes locked onto Razor like it knew something he didn't. Luca finally spoke. "You look nervous." Razor forced a smirk. "You call a guy to a meeting like this, it's hard not to be." Luca chuckled, then leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Smart. You understand the weight of this conversation." Razor's throat felt dry. "I'm here to settle this. What do you want?" Luca took another slow sip of whiskey, savoring the moment. Then, with terrifying calm, he said, "A man named Vincent Carrera. Bring him to me." Razor's pulse spiked. Carrera wasn't just anyone. He was a ghost. A former enforcer who had vanished off the grid years ago. Some said he was dead. Others whispered he had made enemies too powerful, so he disappeared before they could bury him. But Luca knew otherwise. And he wanted Razor to deliver him. Razor exhaled, trying to keep his voice steady. "And if I say no?" Luca smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "You won't." Then, with a casual flick of his fingers, he gestured to the dog. "Because if you don't, I won't kill you, Razor." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'll let him find you first." The dog growled. Low. Deep. Like thunder before a storm. Razor's gut twisted. Because for the first time, he realized something. That wasn't just a dog. It was a hunter. Razor barely made it out of the black orchid before the weight of Luca's demand hit him. Vincent Carrera. A name spoken in hushed whispers, a man who had vanished like smoke. Now, Luca wanted him delivered, alive. Razor swung onto his bike, his fingers gripping the handlebars tighter than necessary. His gut told him this wasn't just about settling a debt. There was something bigger at play. And that damn dog. The way it had looked at him. Like it knew. He exhaled sharply. Thinking wouldn't save him. Action would. If Carrera was still alive, Razor needed to find him before Luca's hunters did. But where do you look for a ghost? He rode through the city, his mind sifting through old connections. Vincent Carrera had been an enforcer once, but when he disappeared, he left behind 0 trails. No addresses. No bank records. No known aliases. Except. Razor's mind flicked to someone who might know. The widow. She wasn't Carrera's wife, but the streets called her that after his disappearance. Some said she had been his handler, others his only friend. If anyone knew where Carrera had gone, it was her. And Razor knew exactly where to find her. A rundown bar on the east side, the Hollow. It was a place where secrets died and the desperate came to drown them. As Razor killed the engine outside, a familiar voice crept into his head. Lucas. "I won't kill you, Razor. I'll let him find you first." A low growl echoed in his memory, and for the first time, Razor wasn't sure which terrified him more, Luca's threat, or the dog. Razor pushed open the door to the Hollow, and the stale scent of whiskey and regret hit him like a punch. The place was dimly lit, filled with shadows that clung to the corners. A few regulars glanced his way, but most kept their heads down, drowning whatever sins they carried. At the back, sitting alone in a booth, was the widow. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with dark hair streaked silver. A woman who had seen too much, lost too much. Her fingers curled around a half-empty glass, but when she saw Razor, she sighed. "You must be desperate," she muttered. Razor slid into the booth across from her. "I need to find Carrera." The widow's eyes darkened. She leaned back, swirling her drink. "That's a dangerous question, Razor. I don't have a choice." She studied him for a long moment, then smirked. "Luca's got his claws in you, doesn't he?" Razor didn't answer. The widow took a slow sip, then set her glass down with a soft clink. "Vincent's gone, Razor. He didn't just disappear, he buried himself. If you dig, you won't like what you find." "I'll take my chances," Razor said. She exhaled, shaking her head. "You really don't get it, do you?" She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "You're not hunting Carrera. You're walking straight into his trap." Razor frowned. "What do you mean?" The widow's fingers drummed the table. "You think Luca wants Vincent dead?" She let out a bitter laugh. "No. Luca wants something else." Razor's pulse quickened. "What?" The widow looked him dead in the eye. "To wake the beast." A chill ran down Razor's spine. Before he could ask more, the door to the bar creaked open. A new presence stepped inside. Something cold. Something watching. Razor didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Because he already knew what was standing there. The dog. And it had finally come for him. The air in the hollow grew thick, suffocating. Razor didn't turn his head, but he felt it, a presence, primal and unshakable. The widow saw it too. Her fingers tensed around her glass, but she didn't move. You need to leave. Now. Razor swallowed hard. He forced himself to turn, and there it was. The dog. Standing in the doorway, motionless. Its golden eyes glowed in the dim light, locked onto him with something more than animal instinct. It wasn't just watching. It was waiting. For what? A command? A signal? Or a mistake? The few patrons in the bar barely noticed. But the widow did. And that's what scared Razor the most. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. Do you know what that thing is? Razor shook his head. Luca's dog. The widow scoffed. Luca doesn't own that thing. He just knows how to use it. Razor frowned. Use it for what? She hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet it barely reached his ears, she said, for hunting men like you. A chill ran down Razor's spine. He turned back to the dog. It hadn't moved. But its ears flicked. It had heard her. Razor forced himself to stay calm. If he ran, it would chase him. And he wasn't sure if he'd make it out alive. He turned back to the widow. Tell me where Carrera is. She exhaled sharply. You're not gonna like the answer. Try me. Her eyes locked onto his. You don't need to find Carrera, Razor. She nodded toward the dog. He's already found you. Razor's heart slammed against his ribs. What the hell did that mean? Before he could ask, the dog moved. Not lunging. Not attacking. Just stepping forward, one slow, deliberate step. Like a predator deciding when to strike. Razor knew one thing. He had to get out. Now. Razor's pulse hammered. The dog stood still, its golden eyes unerringly intelligent, like it knew something Razor didn't. He turned back to the widow. What the hell do you mean? Carrera's found me. She hesitated, then leaned in. Vincent Carrera isn't a man anymore. Razor frowned. What the hell does that mean? The widow's voice dropped lower. People like you hear a name and think of a man. But Carrera? He became something else. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass. You ever wonder why he disappeared so cleanly? Why no one could find a trace? Razor clenched his jaw. Because he knew how to vanish. She smirked. Or because he never left. Razor exhaled sharply, frustration creeping in. Enough riddles. Where is Carrera? The widow looked past him, her expression unreadable. Right in front of you. Razor turned back toward the door, toward the dog. His breath caught in his throat. No. That wasn't possible. Bullshit, he muttered. You're telling me, the widow nodded. That dog isn't just a dog. She swirled her drink. It's Carrera. Razor felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. He looked at the dog again. It stared back, silent, unmoving. His mind raced. Could it be true? No, it was insane. But Luca had sent him after Vincent Carrera. Not to find him. Not to kill him. But to face him. And now the hunt had come full circle. The widow's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. You wanted to find Carrera? She gave a dry laugh. You just did. And now? She leaned back, her voice like a death sentence. He's come to settle the score. Razor's breath felt heavy, like the air itself was turning against him. He locked eyes with the dog. No, Carrera. It couldn't be true. A dead man couldn't come back. A dog couldn't be the ghost of someone he helped destroy. And yet, there was something unnatural in the way it watched him. Something that made his skin crawl. The widow was still watching him too, her fingers drumming against the table. You don't believe me, she said, reading the doubt on his face. I believe in a lot of things, Razor muttered. Ghosts ain't one of them. The widow smirked. That's your problem. You think just because something doesn't fit into your world, it can't be real. The dog took another step forward. Razor felt it more than he saw it, like the weight of an executioner lifting the blade. His instinct screamed at him. Move. Get out. Now. Razor turned on his heel and stormed toward the back exit of the hollow. He shoved the door open, stepping into the cold, damp alley. But as soon as he did, the growl. Low. Deep. Like thunder rolling in from the distance. Razor whipped around. The dog stood in the doorway. Its shadow stretched long under the flickering alley light. You don't want to do this, Razor said, forcing steel into his voice. The dog didn't move. Didn't blink. Then, it took one step forward. Razor reached for the knife tucked in his jacket. He'd faced armed men, survived ambushes, fought his way out of impossible situations. But this? This was different. Because in the pit of his stomach, he knew, he wasn't the one hunting anymore. He was the prey. And Carrera? He was here to collect. The alley felt tighter, the walls closing in like a vice. Razor's grip tightened around the knife in his jacket. His instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew better. Prey runs. And right now, that's exactly what Carrera, or whatever the hell this was, wanted him to be. The dog took another step forward. Deliberate. Measured. Not rushing. Not lunging. It was toying with him. Razor swallowed hard. You were just a man, he said, voice low, like speaking any louder might break the fragile grip he had on his sanity. A damn man, Carrera. A gust of wind kicked through the alley, rattling the trash cans. The dog, Carrera, didn't react. Then, a whisper. Not from the wind. Not from the street beyond. From the dog. You took everything from me. Razor's blood turned ice cold. He heard it. Not barking. Not growling. A voice. Human. Raspy. And it came from Carrera's throat. No, Razor breathed. This isn't real. The dog took another step closer. You left me to rot, Razor staggered back, nearly tripping over a loose brick. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He hadn't felt fear like this in years. You thought it was over, the voice was getting clearer, deeper, edged with something unnatural. Razor's knife was out now, blade glinting under the dim alley light. Stay the hell back. A dry, eerie chuckle filled the space. And then, the dog changed. Right in front of him. Its fur rippled, like shadowy tendrils slithering beneath its skin. Its form twisted, stretching, elongating, becoming something more, something worse. Razor blinked. And suddenly, Vincent Carrera stood before him. Not as he had been. But as something else. Something wrong. His face was gaunt, his eyes golden like the dog's had been. Shadows clung to his frame, flickering like firelight. And he was smiling. Razor's breath hitched. This wasn't just revenge. This was retribution. Carrera's voice was soft, almost amused. Did you really think death would stop me? The knife nearly slipped from Razor's fingers. Because for the first time in his life, he knew he wasn't going to win. Razor's mind raced. This isn't real. It can't be real. But Carrera stood there, grinning. Shadows flickered around him like living things, distorting the air, making it impossible to tell where he ended and the darkness began. Razor tightened his grip on the knife. You're dead. His voice barely held steady. Carrera tilted his head. And yet, here we are. His voice was smooth, too calm, too certain. You always thought you were untouchable, Razor. But tell me, his golden eyes gleamed. Do you still feel that way? The air thickened. Razor's chest tightened. It felt like 1,000 invisible hands were pressing against him, stealing his breath. Run. The instinct slammed into him like a freight train. But his legs wouldn't move. Carrera took a slow step forward. You see, I spent a long time in the dark. And in that darkness, I learned something. His grin widened, teeth sharper than they should be. Death isn't the end. It's just a door. A gust of wind howled through the alley, cold as a grave. Then, Carrera wasn't there. Razor's heart stopped. His eyes darted around, searching. Where did he go? A whisper brushed against his ear. You left me to die in the dirt. Razor spun, slashing wildly with the knife. Nothing. Then, a hand burst from the shadows behind him, gripping his wrist. Razor choked on his own breath as Carrera emerged from the darkness itself, his grip ironclad. Carrera leaned in, voice a whisper of pure malice. Now it's your turn. The shadow swallowed them both. And Razor's scream never made it past his lips. Razor plunged into the darkness. It wasn't just blackness, it was void. A space without walls, without light, without escape. And then, the pain began. It started as a dull ache in his bones. Then, like ice spreading through his veins, it grew sharper. His knees buckled, but there was no ground to hit. Just endless falling. A voice whispered in the dark. You thought you could outrun this? Razor's breath hitched. Carrera's voice. Suddenly, a dim, flickering light appeared. And with it, the memories. He was no longer in the void. He was back in that alley, years ago. The night he had left Carrera bleeding in the dirt. The scene played out before him as if he were a spectator. He watched his younger self towering over Carrera, boot pressed against his chest, laughing. You're done, old man. Your time's up, the younger Razor smirked as he wiped blood from his knuckles. Carrera, weak and broken, tried to speak, but Razor only kicked him harder. Razor's stomach twisted. He had forgotten how ruthless he had been. How much he had enjoyed it. Then, a shift. The younger Razor stepped back, but Carrera didn't stay down. This wasn't how it happened. Carrera's broken body twitched, and then, he looked up. But his eyes weren't human anymore. They glowed that unnatural, golden hue. Your time's up, Razor, the scene shattered like glass. Razor gasped, yanked back into the void. But now, he wasn't alone. Hands, cold, clawed, inhuman, reached from the darkness, gripping his arms, his legs, his throat. Dragging him down. A familiar voice echoed all around him. This is only the beginning, Razor tried to scream. But the darkness swallowed him whole. Razor thrashed against the unseen hands dragging him down. Cold. Suffocating. Endless. It felt like drowning in shadows, an abyss with no bottom. Let me go, he choked, but his voice barely echoed. Then, a whisper. Fear tastes different when it's your own, doesn't it? Carrera's voice. Razor struggled harder, but the more he fought, the tighter the grip became. His breath grew shallow. Panic clawed at his chest. Was this it? Was this how he ended? Then suddenly, he hit the ground. Hard. The impact rattled through his bones, knocking the wind from his lungs. His surroundings shifted, twisting like smoke. When he blinked, he wasn't in the abyss anymore. He was back in the alley. Only, it wasn't the same. Everything was wrong. The buildings loomed taller, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the air smelled like rusted iron. The world was tinted in deep, eerie reds, like blood under streetlights. Then, he heard it, scratching. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from behind him. Razor turned. The dog. The same stray he had kicked. But it was different now, larger, stronger, its fur darker, its eyes burning gold. Carrera's eyes. The dog took a step forward. Its growl was low, guttural, almost human. Then, Carrera's voice came again, from the dog. You took my life and walked away like it meant nothing. The ground beneath Razor's feet trembled. Now, Razor. Tell me. How does it feel? The dog lunged. Razor barely had time to scream. Razor threw himself backward, barely dodging the lunging beast. Its claws scraped the ground where he had stood a second before, carving deep, jagged lines into the pavement. His pulse pounded in his ears. This isn't real. This isn't real. The dog, no, Carrera, turned toward him slowly. Its golden eyes glowed like fire, locking onto Razor with something beyond rage. Judgment. Running won't change what you did. Razor scrambled to his feet, breath ragged. What do you want from me? The dog bared its teeth. The streetlights flickered, and suddenly, Carrera stood there instead. Not the beaten man Razor had left for dead all those years ago, but something else. Something more. Dressed in a sleek black suit, Carrera's presence radiated power. The kind of power that made Razor's skin crawl. "I should drag you to the same hell you sent me to." Carrera stepped forward, the ground beneath him cracking with each step. "Let you feel the weight of every sin, every breath stolen, every life ruined." Razor's throat was dry. His hands clenched into fists, but his body betrayed him, his knees trembled. He had fought men, outrun cops, cheated death. But this? This was something else. "But," Carrera continued, tilting his head, "I'm feeling generous." Razor swallowed. "What? What do you mean?" A slow, knowing smile spread across Carrera's lips. "A deal, Razor. One final chance." The air around them hummed with unseen energy. Razor's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. "You walk away tonight. But in return, you give me something." Razor's mind spun. "What do you want?" Carrera's grin widened. "Your soul." Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Razor's breath came in shallow gasps. "You're joking." Carrera just stared. "Time's ticking, Razor." He took another step closer. "Decide." Razor looked around. No way out. The shadows stretched. The dog growled low. The world tilted, as if reality itself was slipping. This was it. His last chance. And for the first time in his life. Razor wasn't sure if he had a way out. Razor's hands clenched into trembling fists. His mind screamed for a way out, but deep inside, he knew, there was none. Carrera's golden eyes bore into him, waiting. The air crackled with unseen energy, thick with something ancient, something final. "Well?" Carrera asked, tilting his head. Razor swallowed hard. "And if I don't take the deal?" A slow, knowing smile spread across Carrera's lips. "Then you don't walk away." The dog, that cursed, vengeful beast, stepped forward, its claws clicking against the pavement. Razor felt his blood turn to ice. He had beaten men senseless, outrun cops. And cheated death more times than he could count. But this? This was something else. "You think you're untouchable, Razor," Carrera continued, voice smooth, deadly. "You've built a life on power, fear, and cruelty. But now, the balance has shifted." Razor's breath was shallow. "This can't be real. This is just a nightmare." But he felt the heat of Carrera's presence. Heard the growl of the beast. This was real. "Your soul," Carrera repeated, stepping closer. "Or your life." Razor's body screamed at him to fight, to run, but his instincts knew the truth. No escape. No mercy. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "Fine." Carrera raised an eyebrow. "Fine, what?" Razor forced the words out. "Take it." A slow, satisfied smile crept across Carrera's face. He reached out, placing a single hand on Razor's chest. And then, agony. It wasn't pain in the way Razor had ever felt before. It was deeper. His body seized, his vision blurred, his breath hitched as something unseen was ripped from him. His knees buckled. His screams never left his throat. Then, darkness. When Razor's eyes fluttered open, he was lying in the alley. The world was silent. The streetlights buzzed faintly above. He pushed himself up, but something was wrong. His body felt hollow. Lighter, yet empty. A familiar voice echoed from the darkness. "Enjoy the rest of your days, Razor." Carrera was gone. The dog was gone. But deep inside, Razor felt it, a gaping absence. He had survived. He had walked away. But whatever he had left behind in that alley was gone forever. And for the first time in his life, Razor understood what it truly meant to be damned.